We're now going to take a look at some of the common properties of forms that we're going to see when we're actually interacting with the properties window. Whenever we open up a new program, or at least whenever we open the design view of our project, so whenever we open up form1.vb design view, we're going to open up the properties window, and it's going to show all the properties of that form. So we do need to know at least some more common properties. I mean, when we look at, if you take a look at, you'll see there are a ton of properties for the form. And we're not going to get into every single one of them in excruciating detail. We want to take a look at least some of the more commonly used properties at this point. So we're going to take a look at the name property. We're going to take a look at the text property. We have the font property. We also have a size property. Now this property is actually broken up into two properties. We have a width and a height for the form. And then there are several others that we'll discuss, such as the back color, the form border style, the start position, the background image, and then the icon property. So these are not as common, but we're still going to talk about them because we will be using at least some of them in our examples. The name property appears in the design category. As you see, there are several different categories, so different ways we can classify all the properties that are given to us. So if you look under the design category, you'll find the name property there. It appears as the word name. That's all it is. And this is just basically the name of the form. And this is primarily used for coding purposes. So whenever we're doing coding for the form, we might have something like the name of the form, a dot, and then some other field with it. You really don't use it for any other reason. What I do suggest is if you don't change the name of it at the very beginning, just leave this alone. So if you've already written some code and you've used the name of the form and you decide you're going to change the name of the form, well, what could happen is you may need to go back and change your code. So if you had form1 dot something and then later on you decide to change the name of the form, you're going to have to go back and replace form1 with whatever you had, or whatever you decided to change the name to. So this is one of those where if you change it at the very beginning, that's fine. If you're like halfway through the project and you decide you want to change the name, I just recommend leaving it as is, because all it's doing is just it's used for coding purposes and nothing else. By default, the name of the form is form1, and like I said, it's perfectly fine to leave this as the default. If you want to change the name of the form to be something else, you're more than welcome to. But this field is just letting us know, or this property is just letting know that the name is called form1 or whatever we call it, and then we can use that as a reference whenever we're writing portions of our program. The text property appears in the appearance category in our properties window. So if you go down to where it says appearance, you'll find the property there. And this is just simply the text that appears in the title bar of our form. Now, what do we mean by that? So when you run the program and a window pops up with the form, there's a title at the top. This is what we're talking about. The text here is just whatever appears in that top line of our window in this case. Even though we call it a form, when you actually run the program, a pop-up window shows up which contains our form or our program, and we're talking about the title of that particular window. By default, this is called form1. You can leave it as is if you want, but this is probably something you'll want to change. So if you want to change the current text, all you have to do is just go to the bar where it says text in our properties window. Just delete what's in there and type in whatever name you want to call that field or whatever you want to call that particular form or window. Now, we could also change the text by using code. So you could go into the property portion and change it there, but we could also write some code to actually change the text as well. And I'm going to show you how to do it, or at least I'm going to explain it. And you're welcome to go and just try this out on your own. Open up Visual Studio and go into the code and actually make this change. You can see it for yourself. So what you would do is if you go inside form1.vb, so if you go into the code view of it, you're going to see a particular sub, or what we call a sub procedure, and it's going to look something like this. It's going to say private sub form1 load, then you have parentheses, sender as object, e as event args, and then handles mybase.load. There's going to be some space, and then end sub. So this is our main think of it like our main method. Like if you're writing a program in Java, this is pretty much equivalent to our main. And this is I'll mention this a little bit, but this is the sub procedure that starts as soon as we load our form. That's why it's called form1_load. So what you can do is inside of this sub, you would add the following line of code. You would do me.text equals new text and put that in quotes. Okay, so you would just put that line in there. And what this does is it's going to actually change the text when you run the program. So as we mentioned, this sub procedure just simply handles the event of loading the form. So when we click on run, your form loads, and as it's loading, this sub procedure executes. So it's going to run the code in there where you say change the text field or change the text property to new text. So what you would see is new text appear in the text portion of your form. The font property also appears in the appearance category. And this isn't just a single property, it's actually a group of properties where we can modify things like the font name, size, color, and so forth. So the way you would do this is under that option, you should see a set of dots at the end. So you just click on it and it will open a font dialog box. Now this box should look very familiar to you if you've done any Microsoft-based application program where you can specify like underscores and lines and colors and fonts and all that. But that window will pop up and then you can make any changes you want to the font of your text. The size property is actually in the layout category. So this is in a different spot than the other properties we've talked about so far. Now this property looks just a little bit different. It actually contains two numbers that are separated by a comma. The first number that we're given is the width of the form, and then the second number gives us the height of the form. Now by default, these numbers should be 300 and 300, so the width and the height would both be 300. Now we can change both of these to different numbers. So we can either type in the values directly that we want, or we can use the plus box that's given to open both the width and the height properties and make changes. And we'll see later on how we can actually change these values using code. Now we mentioned a couple of other properties that may be used here and there. The one we're going to talk about is the background image property. And this also appears in the appearance category. And the idea with this property is that we can actually include a background image to our form. So like by default, you just see this gray space stuff, like there's nothing there, but we could actually add a background image if we wanted to. And the way we would do this, if we want to add an image, is we would click on the dots in this property in order to open up a properties window. And what this will do is we can actually use this to select an image from our computer and load it into our program. So whenever you click on these dots, you're going to get what's called the Select Resource dialog box. So from here, you would actually click on the Import button, and then another window will pop up where you can browse your computer to find the file that you want. So you can just go to wherever your file is, select it, and then you would import the image into Visual Studio, and then you should see the image as a background image in your form. Now I should mention that you may need to change the background image layout property. That way you can actually stretch it to see the full image. Like if it's a really large image, you may just see like a portion of it covering the entire thing. So you may need to adjust it in order to see the full image. So what I would recommend is just experiment with it. Maybe take a small image and kind of play around with the background image layout property to see what you would get, and maybe try some other choices to kind of just play around and see what kind of images you can get for your background. As we already mentioned, there are tons of other properties available. We've already mentioned that there's the back color, the form border style, start position, icon, and there are just tons of other properties in that properties window. So what I suggest is just try some of them out on your own. Just go in there and play around different options and see what happens. So what you can do is just start up a project and change some different things, run it, see what happens to your window. then maybe go back and make some more changes and then run your program again and just observe and see what kind of changes actually occur when you make changes to those properties.